Do I need to use the microphone? Is that helpful? Yes, okay. I see that it is helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much also for the very kind introduction. I realize now that I'm far too busy listening to all these things. Thanks also to the organizers for having me today, many organizers, and to Ono for hosting this event. It's my first time in Israel, and I've already learned a lot in these 2 days. And actually I hope to learn quite a few more things, because I'm not an EU-Israel relations expert. I know about EU external relations quite a bit, but I've never specialized in EU-Israel relationships, and I notice that many of you know a lot about that. So I hope that we can have a nice discussion on that. So the very first question that I got over the past 2 days is actually the most important one. Where does my first name come from? So let's get that out of the way. There is no Egyptian link at all. It's just there was a very famous singer in the Netherlands where I come from, who was called Ramses in the 1960s. And my parents really liked the name, so that's the only reason I have this name. But it's interesting when you're in these regions that you get these questions. So, first of all, an apology, I'm a lawyer. So there will be some references to treaty provisions in my presentation. I will not try and not turn this into a legal presentation. But there will be some elements, of course, being a lawyer, I cannot avoid any of that. So it will be about Brexit, obviously. And indeed, it's very timely, very well organized and timely at the moment, almost assuming that you know what was happening. But the thing is, I always thought over the past 3 years or so that I knew what was happening, and I didn't. I lost many a bottle of wine in battles with my colleagues. So it's very, very difficult to predict these things. So, what are we talking about? We're indeed, as Maya also explained, it's the very first time that we're looking at European disintegration, actually. This is the very first time that an EU member state is actually leaving, which to everyone in the European Union, perhaps also outside, is a bit surreal. It's really strange. You know that it's happening, but it's almost impossible to understand fully what is happening here. One of us is leaving. It's indeed, we've made the comparison to a divorce already. I mean, it feels like that, right? You're losing a friend, and the friend doesn't want to belong to your club anymore. So there's also an emotional element in that whole story. And that comes for everyone. I mean, the support for the European Union may be rising. That is a good thing, perhaps. So there is a good element in that sense, that we can have more integration at a certain moment. But at the same time, people also in my own country, in the Netherlands, do not really know what the European Union is about. So it's not just Israel. It's also in the EU member states that I have to explain on a daily basis almost what it is actually about and what the value is of being a member of the European Union. So for the first time in history, we now have this Article 50 in the treaty, and I have to admit, I was in London at the time of the referendum. And we all went to bed in the evening and said, okay, this is going to be fine. And then we woke up and we saw the results on the news. And it's only then that we started to read Article 50, us European law specialists, and said, okay, we know there's Article 50, but we've never really taken a good look at it. So this is the first time that this article is being used, and it was never meant to be used, actually, right? So Article 50 was in the treaty mainly for political reasons, without having the intention of having it there. Why is it so difficult to leave the European Union? I think one of the main reasons is that the European Union is not just an international organization, it's an integration organization. It is integrating almost every aspect of daily life of people, although they do not realize that. So it's really integration, the internal market, and the cooperation between countries on all these different aspects. It's not just between states, it's indeed also within the states that you have all those European rules. So it is an organization with an ambition to integrate the peoples of Europe to create this ever closer union idea. So that is behind that. People are not just Dutch or German or French or Italian or Estonian, they're also European citizens. So you have this European citizenship. And of course, the impact then is much larger than with any other international organization. I'll come back to some of the other things later on. The thing is, and that's the reason that I probably got this invitation, it's not just an internal issue. It's not just about those 28 member states. No, it is also about all those other states in the world that have relationships with the European Union. And almost each and every state in the world has a relationship with the European Union, either a trade relationship or some kind of other international agreement. There are hardly any states left in the world that do not have any relationship with the EU at all. And it has to do with the fact that, especially in the current treaty, you find these provisions like the one you see here, which show you that the EU has become a global actor. And my colleagues sometimes even say, if you look at the current treaties on the European Union is much more looking outward to the rest of the world than inwards. So the idea is, okay, internally we may have finished almost everything, it seems to be fine. Now it's time to look outwards. What are our relationships with the rest of the world? We want, as you can see here, promote the values of the European Union. So provisions like this are very much about promoting the EU values and trying to be a good global citizen in a way. Following the lines and the rules of international law and the United Nations Charter, as you can see here. So the European Union is not just about the relationships between the 28, it's very much about it wanting to be a very important player in the world. Other example is in this one. There's a lot of text. These are terrible slides. I always tell people not to put so much text on slides. This is Article 21, and the only thing you have to read is the first line, perhaps. So the Union's action on the international scene shall be guided by the principles which have inspired its own creation. So you can read something of an ambition in there, right? So we have brought 28 states together on the basis of certain values, the rule of law, democracy. Let's see if we can try and do that with other friends in the world, establishing relationships with other states and seeing if we can sort of pursue the same values. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, because it can also have this sort of arrogant dimension in it, right? The European Union imposing its values on certain other states. And there are many states that simply say, you know what, we like to have a trade relationship with you. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we want to follow all your principles and your European values. So there's also a discussion on that, on that issue. And it's increasingly difficult for the European Union to deal with that. Although, as an economic power, it can sort of force these human rights clauses to be part of trade agreements, for instance. The term neo-colonialism has been used also in this context. You can see there's something in here, okay, we want to have a relationship with you, but it's on our terms. You have to believe in our European values. So what about EU-Israel relationship? I mean, there are many agreements between the European Union and Israel. I don't have to tell you that. The most important one, the sort of framework thing, is of course the 2000 EU-Israel Association Agreement, Euromed thing that I'll come back to later briefly, because both parts are very important to each other. So the EU is Israel's largest trade market, about 1/3 of Israel's total trade, which is quite something, right? At the same time, Israel is the EU's most important trading partner in the Mediterranean region. So there are very good relationships, at least on economic terms. As we've heard, of course, over the past years, it has not always been easy to maintain this relationship and to work towards a closer cooperation. Nevertheless, I think in principle, both the European Union and Israel, they would not risk drifting apart. I think they, at the end, would like to stick very closely together. And my own country, despite perhaps slight change in policy, has always been very much a promoter of So having a very good, strong relationship with Israel. So let's take a look at Brexit then. So what happens? Talking about the international position of the United Kingdom. What happens if the United Kingdom leaves the European Union is that it's on its own, basically. It's on its own. It has to, what I call here, reset its international position. Now, most of what it does, what the UK does at this moment, is defined by what the European Union has done. So most of, almost everything that is going on in the area of trade, for instance, is done by the European Union. Trade being a competence of the European Union, which is, and I'll come back to that, exclusive, as the lawyers would say. It's an exclusive competence, which means that the member states cannot say anything about trade. They cannot conclude treaties that are concerning trade. Okay, so when you get out of the European Union, you're on your own. You have to sort of find new trade relationships with all these other states. And there are about 1,100 international agreements concluded by the European Union. Around 700 or 800 are very relevant for the United Kingdom. But it's not so easy, of course, to do that overnight. All of that has to do, and this is a bit legal, but all of that has to do with this division of competences between the European Union and its member states. So what they decided to do is divide the competences. So I already mentioned trade to you. Trade is an exclusive competence, which means that the member states were willing to say, okay, European Union, you can conclude all kinds of trade agreements. We're not part of any trade agreement anymore. But in other areas, the member states are still very much present in the environment, environmental treaties or human rights treaties or other things. They are very much present. And in some areas, there are even exclusive member state competences, which means that the European Union cannot do anything in those areas. And of course, after Brexit, the UK has to think about all those things. Okay, where do I want to have relationships and new relationships, and with whom do I want to have new relationships after Brexit? So the problem is, and this is something I have argued as somewhere else as well. If you look at Article 15, this is again a little bit legal, but I hope it's clear. Article 50 is quite clear. So the moment you are a member state, you have to follow the rules of the European Union. The moment you're no longer a member state, you do not have to follow the rules of the European Union. But there is a period in between, and that is what they're trying to negotiate now, to have a certain transition period. And I will come back to that as well. The problem is, at this moment, Brexit did not happen, which means that nothing changed. Everybody's talking about, but we now have Brexit. No, we don't, right? We're still waiting for Brexit to happen, which means that virtually nothing changed for the United Kingdom. The only thing that changed for the United Kingdom is that they cannot join some of the meetings anymore in Brussels, where the European Union meets. So Article 50 tells us that when Brexit is on the agenda, the UK will have to leave the room. But that's basically the only thing. For the rest, nothing changed. So they still have to follow all the rules that are in the European Union Treaty until they're really outside. And it's actually a funny thing that they have to leave the room, but it's not just the formal meetings, but it's also those nice dinners that they always have in Brussels, right? The heads of state coming together and having a nice dinner and discussing almost everything. Those first days, they had a very first dinner, and they had to ask Theresa May to actually leave the room. I'm sorry, we're going to have a nice dinner, but you have to leave. This was actually the very first time, already on the first evening when they met after the referendum, that Theresa May could no longer join that meeting, informal meeting of the European Council. And of course, also emotionally, right? That is something. If somebody literally physically leaves the room and the other ones are discussing things without her, that was an emotional moment for the European Union as well. So this respect for the division of competences, as you can see here at the bottom, is there still. So they cannot conclude trade agreements because they are still an EU member. They cannot do many other things because they are still an EU member. The interesting question is, if they are now part of the European Union, and they can rely on international agreements that were concluded by the European Union. The moment they get out of the European Union, they will not be part of those agreements anymore. So, can the UK already try and conclude new agreements, for instance with Israel, with many other states, before they're actually out of the European Union? Can they start negotiations on those agreements? My formal legal answer to that is no, they cannot, because they do not have the competence to conclude trade agreements. I would even say they do not have the competence to negotiate trade agreements, because they don't have the competence in trade. Yes, they might be leaving, but at this moment they're still a member. So this is a very formal legal argument. So based on the rules, my argument is they're not even allowed to negotiate new trade deals with any of the other countries in the world. They simply have to wait until Brexit Day. And now you will probably say, but that's not really fair, right? Because Brexit happens in one split second. You're in, the next day you're out. You don't have any time to negotiate those 700 agreements with all the other states. So should we not give them some time to do that? Yes, we should. And actually that is what the transition period, which is in the withdrawal agreement, is all about. The United Kingdom is given until the end of 2020 to negotiate new trade deals with other countries. That's even quite a short period. I mean, the agreement that was concluded between the European Union and Canada, CETA, took about 7 years, right? So it may take a very long time to get a trade agreement. So is it enough to give them just 2 years or 1 year? Probably not. So, and that is also something that, I'll come back to some of the other things, but I'm not going to tell everything. Some of the other things, this one, no.
Is it your sense that the British are in fact waiting?
Sorry?
Is it your sense that the British agree with your legal opinion?
No, they don't agree with that. They don't agree with that. I'll come to that. Let me just briefly to make this point clear. Perhaps this sentence is important.
You have 10 minutes more, so maybe questions at the end.
Okay. Okay, I have to speed up a bit because I have many more slides. The principle of sincere cooperation is very, very important. It tells everyone that you have to follow the rules of European Union law. You cannot start negotiations if you don't have the competence, for instance. So this is what this principle of sincere cooperation is about. Let me then, and this is a case related to that, but let me come to the point of the UK itself. It has already done so. It has already concluded many of these agreements. They're waiting. 15 agreements covering 45 countries have been what they call rolled over. So basically what they do is they say, okay, we simply copy-paste part of the agreements we have. And for instance, also with Israel, they already had negotiations on this. Let's have a similar trade relationship as you now have with the European Union between Israel and the United Kingdom. That is what the term rolling over means, simply trying to copy-paste those international agreements to EU-UK agreements. So, what happens after Brexit? Can they remain a party to the existing agreements that the European Union concluded, for instance? That is a problematic situation as well. That is really problematic. Given the fact that I don't have too much time, I will skip some of this stuff and immediately go to, for instance, these agreements. Agreements that are concluded only by the European Union and another state. EU-only agreements. So, a very recent good example would be the EU-Singapore trade agreement. Only concluded by the European Union and Singapore. How many signatures? 2. For the European Union and for Singapore. Can the UK remain a party to this agreement? My answer would be no. Why not? Because it's an agreement between the EU and Singapore. So they have to go out. They have to get out of the treaty. If they want to have a trade relationship with Singapore, they have to renegotiate a new treaty. They are no longer an EU member, cannot stay in that agreement. What about the other agreements that are not EU-only agreements, but the ones we call mixed agreements. Mixed agreements are agreements between the EU and the member states. I think I have an example here. Between all the EU member states and the EU and another country. EU mixed agreements with Israel. How many signatures? Counting. On one side, 28 member states plus the European Union, that's 29. On the other side, just one, Israel, that's 30 signatures in total. So the UK, in this agreement, for instance, between the EU and Israel, did sign the agreement. It is a party to that agreement. Can it stay as a party? My answer still would be no, they cannot. Why not? They signed. Yes, but they signed, my agreement would be, as an EU member state. So you can see, the text refers to EU member states between the European communities at the time and their member states on the one part, and the State of Israel on the other part. So, even in the case of mixed agreements, my argument would be, they have to renegotiate those agreements for themselves. And perhaps it's easy, they can copy-paste and negotiations will not take too long, but that very much depends on the other state if they are interested, in this case Israel. Would they be interested to have a similar trade relationship with the UK as the one that they now have with the European Union? I'm not sure. The European Union is a big trading bloc. The UK is just one country. So perhaps they can have a better deal with the UK than the one they had with the EU. There's one possibility perhaps, and that is the multilateral mixed agreements. So I've now been talking about the bilateral ones, EU and member states on one hand and Israel on the other side. But there are also multilateral mixed agreements where everybody is a party. Think of the Paris Climate Agreement, for instance. Almost the entire world is there, right? Everyone signs for themselves. Could they stay on in those agreements, the UK? My answer would be probably yes. So, but under international law, at least you would have the obligation to say that from now on, the UK is fully responsible for everything in that treaty. Because it's no longer a member of the European Union, it has to take over all the obligations. So that is a way out, perhaps. Take more time? Or?
5, 6.
Good.
Depends on the mood.
Then I'm skipping a few things, because this is a bit more technical. Yes, question?
What about the situation in the WTO, where the EU took over Britain's voice, the UK's voice, and then now it will reclaim it?
It's a good example. We can return to it in the discussion, but my short answer would be, that's actually an example where the UK will have to take full responsibilities for something it has never done. Because in the WTO, the World Trade Organization, all the EU member states are still a member, but they're basically not doing anything, right? Because trade is an exclusive EU competence, so the European Union deals with everything. They are the ones that speak on behalf of everyone. So the UK is there, but without any responsibilities. But suddenly, after Brexit, it will have to take over the full responsibility for everything in trade law that goes on in the World Trade Organization. If there's anything left of the World Trade Organization. So that's another story. So it will have to, indeed, it will have to start from scratch. It will be an international actor suddenly on its own, and has to replace all these international agreements, and has to enter into all kinds of international diplomatic relations again on its own for the full package, including in particular trade and airspace and aircraft relationships that are also very, very important. In other words, they always say they want to take back control, right? Brexit, the reason for Brexit for the UK is we want to take back control. We were once a world power, we can be a world power again. That is our reason. My estimate is that they will also have to give up control, because they're no longer part of one of the most influential global actors, the European Union, in the world. They're no longer at the table where the decisions are being taken. That is problematic. And they will probably feel that they are no longer part of that system. And we can discuss that later on. So perhaps in the final minutes that are left, let me say a few things about the possibilities for the for the United Kingdom to stay connected to foreign and security policy. Because the foreign and security policy of the European Union has developed quite impressively over the past years. You may not always see that because it's difficult to get 28 states in line on certain foreign policies. But PESCO was mentioned, that is the permanent structured cooperation on military defense and military defense issues. For the first time we see some development there. And I agree that it's probably due to the fact that the UK is not there, either formally blocking things or basically informally blocking things. So there are movements there. The funny thing is, the United Kingdom has always been a bit against the European Union being active in foreign policy. It says foreign policy and security policy are actually things that really belong to a state. We want to work together, but we're not willing to transfer any competences from the UK to the European Union in foreign and security policy. Suddenly, you had a question on this.
Do you see the Brexit as a fait accompli, or do you think that there might be any possibility of going back?
That's a good question. Let's discuss that during the discussion time. But my first hunch is that there is always a possibility that I've learned not to see things going in a certain direction. So at a certain moment we may have new elections, perhaps even a new referendum, a new government. It is possible. On the other hand, so many things have been broken already. So the relationship at this moment is very, very difficult between the EU and the UK. So I'm not really sure if it will be easy for them to stay on at this moment. And they will probably not get any additional rights from the European Union. So that is, but it's a good point that we can perhaps pick up on. And the funny thing is that they've never been so enthusiastic about the European foreign and security policy as they are today. If you read the documents, they really want to be connected to the EU's foreign policy and security policy. They really want to be connected. They've never been enthusiastic about it, but suddenly they say, can we please stay with the European Union's foreign and security policy? Can we have a seat at the table? And, well, I'm leaving this slide for now, but the thing is, they probably cannot. There's nothing you can find in the treaties that allows third states, non-member states, to participate in anything that goes on in the European Union if you're not a member state. You cannot be in the council meetings, you cannot have a commissioner, you cannot be in the parliament. So there are no possibilities for the United Kingdom to really be involved in this. Of course they can, if they want, join in military missions. There are many third states. Canada is frequently participating in military missions. That is a possibility. But then you have to live up to the EU's rules, to follow the EU's rules. And you cannot set the agenda. So even in this area, I see a lot of problems for the United Kingdom not being able to join in. The very final slides, skipping this, and we can return to some of these things in the discussion if you want. That's actually this one. And this is also my conclusion. For the people of my age, you will hopefully recognize, you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. That is actually the case. This is actually the case. It proves, if we've learned one thing, is that it is very difficult to get into the European Union, but it's equally difficult to get out of the European Union. The UK thought it was an easy thing. We have Article 50 now in the treaty, we can leave, but as we have seen over the past 3 years, it is very difficult to leave the European Union. And that has everything to do with the fact that it is an integration organization. Everything is connected. You see the battles about the Irish border. Where do we have the external border? Is it in Ireland? No, we don't want it in Ireland. Do we want it between Ireland and England and Wales? No, we don't want it there. So you see those kind of questions all relate to the fact that it's one single market which you cannot easily split up. This is exactly 30 minutes. Thank you very much.
you so much, Ramses, for an enlightening presentation. And you already started well, thank you, Ramses. And you already started taking questions in a natural manner, so let's just continue that. And the clock is still on summertime, but it's now 10 to 3. So let's say whoever goes later than 3 takes from the coffee break, so be aware. But let's do that. Let's take 15 minutes. And shall we start in the back with Noga? And just say your name and from where you work, where you come from.
Hi, I'm Noga. I'm from the Center for Policy Research at the Foreign Office. You mentioned a lot of effects on British foreign affairs, but I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to how this will affect the European Union's ability to do business. I mean, for instance, wouldn't it also be a relative interpretation to say that since the third parties who signed a treaty with the EU signed it with a specific kind of EU, once Britain is out of it, then the agreement in of itself is null and void because one of the signatories is no longer a member state?
Yeah. Do you want me to answer this immediately, or
No,
you put
what
it
you
collective?
prefer. Collect me maybe a few, or what you want.
But perhaps this is no. Let me take this one, and we can see how this goes. That is actually an international treaty law question. That's the one you raise. So, okay, did anything change for the treaty partners? Is there a change in circumstances for the?
That was an example, an important one. But the question really is: did anything change in terms of the European Union's ability to continue in the same fashion that it did up until Brexit? How will this affect the European Union's ability to do business?
It will affect the European Union's ability. I mean, there's several reasons for that. One is the UK is a very important trading partner. It has 60 million consumers, for instance. So it's a big chunk of the internal market. So for other states, having a European Union without the UK means a smaller market. It means a market without the UK. So that will affect future trading relationships. The other thing is, of course, security. With the UK, the European Union loses a member of the United Nations Security Council. So we have less influence there as well. So it will affect the European Union. Perhaps on the positive side, most of the trade relationships have already been settled between the European Union and other states. So there are already many trade relationships in place. And then the next question is, do we want to reconsider them, or do other states ask the European Union to reconsider because they are losing a small part of the market? Well, we have to see. But you're absolutely right. It will not only affect the UK, but also the EU.
Please. Just your name and...
I'm Isaac Herzog. I'm a member of this faculty, and due diligence, my family originates from Ireland and England. And I was listening to the way you described the difficulties. I follow this closely. Backstop overshadows any other difficulty, as if Good Friday put an end to centuries of British nightmare with Ireland, and now it's coming back to the picture. And if not for backstop, I doubt if an island that has such a strong economy would have had it difficult leaving the Union.
It was more a comment, right? Thank you.
No, it's actually a good question.
No, it was a question.
Was a question? There was a question mark at the end, that's all.
I can read a question in there.
Okay, great. Shall we take another one?
Yeah, sure.
Please.
Okay. My name is Samuel Frankel. I teach finance and economics at the Ono and the IDC at the International School. My question is, from the point of view of a young British guy, citizen, will I be able to expect job mobility within Europe? Once the treaty is out, then I can no longer enjoy the job flexibility, mobility that is so valued by the young people of
the UK.
Yeah. Thank you. Ilan.
Hi, hello. Ilan from Ministry of Justice. It's actually a following question, Nora's question is what Brexit is telling us, this exercise, regarding the general idea of globalization, liberalization, and integration. Is sending a message, a global message, to the European, to others, to other regional integration exercises around the world?
Big questions. Shall we continue taking some?
Yeah, perhaps one more or so, and then I can.
No. Oh, well, the
Oh,
lecturers
yeah,
are
yeah,
interested.
please,
Alfred, please.
Yeah, okay.
Alfred Tobin.
Yeah, Article 50 was incorporated in the treaties quite late in the history of the European Union, because I remember very well it was said that being a member is like Catholic marriage, and there was no divorce provision. And I remember that when Article 50 was being negotiated, in my recollection, it was the UK that wanted to have Article 50. So it's not that, maybe for you it came like a bomb, for me it didn't in this respect, because the British wanted to have this option. Now that brings me to the other observation you have made. You seem to say very strongly that disintegration and the process of living is very impossible, very difficult, because this integration business, it's not an international organization, it's an integration. However, we shouldn't mix matters. For example, you mentioned the backstop. Everybody, from what I read, is saying that the problem with eliminating the backstop is that that there was this Good Friday Agreement, so which has nothing to do, in my opinion, with the European Union. That is, if all the problem is the coexistence of people in the Irish island, okay, I understand that, but that has nothing to do with the European Union, if I might say.
Thank you. Tal, please. Tal Sadin.
We teach and study the European Union a lot by its documents, but over the years I have come to understand that a lot matters that is not written. And although the law seems to be very careful, when crisis comes, you can never be amazed by the leader's ability to find very fine print that nobody cared to read and to use it in ways that nobody has foreseen. And it's all by accident, perhaps. One example, other than Brexit, is the way there would be no bailouts in the euro, but sure there were in like 6 or 7 different ways, and it was all legal, actually. So, to focus on a question, you say that Britain is asked to leave, and it's all by Article 50. But I'm not clear at all, and I think there's a lot of improvising on what meetings it may or may not join. It seems to obey whatever the other leaders tell it. They just leave the room and don't give a fight. But it's not really phrased very clearly. One of Boris Johnson's aides said, well, you can believe it or not, that if Britain is forced, from the Boris Johnson's administration point of view, forced to stay in, they will sabotage the EU because they will still be sitting in various places. And I was wondering, my question to you is, both by the fine print and by your reading of what is between the line or missing from the lines, what really option do they have, seeing that the European Union was very good at signing non-EU international law agreement whenever the Brits gave it a hard time when they were all members?
Thank you. And the last, and please very short because time is running out.
Time is running out, so I will ask you, what's the reason for the Brexit exit? Nobody knows, and nobody talk about it.
What is the reason
for Brexit?
For Brexit, okay.
Nobody knows.
Well, you know, the School of law in Britain, they support it very much. You know why? There is a lot of work for lawyers in the Brexit system. Now, I think that the EU had to change because the EU was built on the philosophy of World War II. And now we are talking about the grandchildren of those people. And they have a different point of view. And they don't, just take for example, why you need the NATO on one side and the EU to deal with security. You have the NATO. So maybe the EU had to change to become just for economic reasons or commerce and trade, leave all the, how you say, the humanities, all the arts, all the emotional world out. Because, and it's very difficult for lawyers, especially for judges, as told you, to understand the point of emotion. The world today is led by emotion and not by mind.
Okay, is there a question or is it a comment?
It's a comment.
Thank you so much.
No, there was a question. What's the reason for it, for Brexit?
Exactly. Yes, thank you very much. This is a whole list. You want me to answer this in 1 minute?
Five.
Five, okay.
Five.
Good. That is
easy,
bad.
yeah?
Easy. No, it's not that easy, because those are very, very important and very difficult questions, actually. Let me pick out a few things. So the very first remarks was about backstop, and actually the point being it's actually quite easy for the UK to leave the European Union, if I understood correctly, right? It's very easy for the UK to leave. It is easy for the UK to leave. Of course, you can get out any moment that you want, but you're giving up many things, right? You're giving up being part of a European Union that had an integration process for so many decades, in which there is indeed a free movement of persons, a free movement of goods, a free movement of services. Everything is shared. There are no borders on those issues of the internal market. You're giving up that point. So yes, it is easy to leave. They will probably survive on their own. No worries about that. But at the cost of what? At the cost of having a very good relationship with many other Europeans. And it also links up to the young, especially the young Brits, the young guy that you mentioned, or girl, that wants to study abroad, that wants to find a job abroad. Most of our people these days, most of my own students, they spend time in another other EU member state for a few months, a few years. This has become so normal. And it will become impossible for the UK unless we find a solution for that. But at this moment, once you're out, you're no longer part of the internal market, you're no longer part of this free movement of people and finding a job somewhere and making use of all these possibilities. The younger people, by the way, didn't vote, as you know, right, in the referendum. Most of them stayed at home. And I'm sure they have second thoughts about that now. Because in the second referendum, I'm sure the younger population will suddenly start voting. So that may tilt the results, indeed, to the other side. Let's see. What is Brexit telling us? What is Brexit telling us about European integration? That's a good question. I think it's also linked a bit to the final question. Is you cannot probably blame the British people for saying no to Europe. If you have been reading newspapers for so many years, in which the European Union was painted as the enemy, right? All the time. It's the European Union, it's Brussels that's taking things away from us. If you tell your people that for many, many years, obviously at a certain moment in a referendum, if you have a chance to say, let's get out of this union. If you have your prime ministers and your ministers coming back from Brussels and telling everyone, we beat them again. We fought, we battled, and we won. In that type of language, of course, you portray them as the enemy. So, in that sense, what is Brexit telling us? It's telling us that we as academics and politicians have not been able to fully explain also the benefits of being in the European Union. And it's especially, indeed, and the point was also made, that especially more difficult to explain after so many years after the Second World War. For my parents, it was quite easy that working together is much better than having a war again. But for the next generations, that war is really, really far away. And the arguments that were valid at that time are still valid, but not so vivid anymore for most of the people, also of my generation even. Let me see. Article 50 was initiated by the UK. Yes, that is true. The UK, it was actually necessary to have Article 50 in the treaty for some member states, and in particular the UK, to actually accept the Lisbon Treaty at the time. But nobody really gave it too much thought, and it also links up to the fact that it is a very incomplete treaty. And it is true that because not everything has been regulated, Article 50 gives a lot of freedom to the politicians to come up, indeed, as was argued, to come up with all these interpretations. So it is law, but you're absolutely right. It is law that can be interpreted in many different ways because so many things have not been laid down in detail in the treaty. And that is what we see happening. Indeed, during a crisis, we will find a solution. The treaty will not stand in the way of any solution we can find for Brexit. You can phrase it in legal terms. That's what we're paid for to do, find a legal loophole here and there. So in the end, I would fully agree that it is all about politics and a willingness to get out of this crisis. And then we will find a way. The treaty will not block that. I think that. I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we can continue talking to each other, discussing during refreshments and coffee. And let's keep to the schedule and come back, rejoin at 3:30. Exactly.